The conference room's air conditioning hit my neck like a blade, sharp enough to make me flinch as I settled into the chair farthest from the projector's heat. The smell of fresh floor polish, that industrial citrus that always reminded me of my first day here, hung in the recycled air while I counted my breaths. 4 in hold, for 4, 4 out. The same rhythm I'd used to steady myself through 6 years of quarterly reviews, budget reconciliations, and the careful dance of keeping my head down while my work spoke for itself. Sarah, we're going to need you to walk us through the Hartford contract discrepancies. Marcus Kellaway's voice carried that particular tone he'd perfected since becoming COO 3 months ago, warm enough for the room, cold enough for me to know exactly where I stood. His silk tie caught the fluorescent light as he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like he was conducting a symphony only he could hear. The other department heads around the mahogany table shifted slightly, that barely perceptible movement that meant someone was about to get thrown under the bus. I opened my laptop, the familiar blue glow washing over my hands. The Hartford discrepancies aren't actually discrepancies, I said, keeping my voice level. They're timing differences between when we invoice and when their payment system processes. Sarah. Marcus's smile never wavered. I think we all understand basic accounting principles here. The room went quiet, except for the return vent's steady whir. Jennifer from legal stopped typing mid-sentence. Tom from facilities glanced up from his phone. Even the wall clock seemed to pause its sweep, though that might have been my imagination. What I need, Marcus continued, is for you to explain why you authorized 3 contract amendments without proper departmental review. Because according to the documentation I've received, these changes cost the company approximately $47,000 in additional service fees. My breath caught somewhere between 4 and hold. I didn't authorize any amendments. I flagged the timing issues and recommended we reach out to Hartford's AP department to sync our billing cycles. The amendments were already in place when I received the contract for review. That's not what this says. Marcus slid a manila folder across the table's polished surface. The sound of paper against wood seemed amplified in the sudden silence. I opened the folder with fingers that felt steadier than they should have. Inside were 3 printed emails with my signature block at the bottom, each one approving changes to the Hartford service agreement. Changes I'd never seen before. Changes that would have saved Hartford money and cost us exactly what Marcus had quoted. The air conditioning cycled off, leaving only the hum of the projector and the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. These aren't mine, I said. Your signature block, your authorization code, sent from your email address. Marcus's voice carried just enough confusion to sound genuine to anyone who didn't know him. Sarah, I know you've been under a lot of pressure lately. Maybe you just forgot. I didn't forget. I looked around the table. I've never seen these emails before. The silence stretched until Jennifer cleared her throat. Well, the signature authentication would be in the system logs if there's any question about. I think we've taken enough of everyone's time with this, Marcus said, his smile brightening as he glanced around the room. Sarah, why don't we continue this conversation in my office? I'm sure we can work something out. That phrase, work something out, landed like a stone in still water. Everyone at the table had heard those words before. Usually they came right before someone's badge stopped working. I gathered my laptop and the manila folder, my hands moving through motions that felt automatic, while my mind raced through every interaction I'd had with the Hartford contract. I'd been meticulous. I always was. Every email saved in its proper folder, every phone call logged with timestamps and next steps, every amendment request documented with the original source and approval chain. Sarah, Marcus was standing now, his hand already on the door handle. Shall we? The walk to his office felt longer than it should have, our footsteps echoing off the polished concrete floors. The scent of fresh coffee from the break room, mixed with the ozone smell that always lingered near the copy machines. Normal Tuesday morning office sounds, keyboards clicking, printers humming, someone laughing at something on their screen, but everything felt muffled, like I was hearing it from underwater. Marcus's office occupied a corner of the third floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the parking lot and the strip mall beyond. He'd redecorated since taking over, replacing his predecessor's warm wood tones with stark white furniture and abstract art that looked expensive but cold. The kind of space designed to make visitors feel small. "Have a seat," he said, settling behind his desk while I took the chair across from him. The leather was cold against my back. He opened a different folder, thicker than the first one, and pulled out a stack of papers. "Sarah, you've been with us for 6 years. Good work mostly. Reliable. But I think we both know that the operations analysis role has evolved since I came on board." I counted my breaths. 4 in. These Hartford contract changes are concerning, obviously, but they're part of a larger pattern I've been tracking. Missed deadlines on the Morrison project review, that issue with the vendor payments last month, the compliance audit findings. Hold for 4. I know change can be difficult, and I know my approach to operational efficiency has been challenging for some team members who are used to the old way of doing things. 4 out. So here's what I'm thinking. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on that warm tone again. We put you on a performance improvement plan. 60 days to demonstrate that you can adapt to our new operational standards. Clear deliverables, measurable outcomes, regular check-ins. A chance to reset. The words hung in the air while I stared at the papers he'd spread across his desk. A PIP, the corporate equivalent of a scarlet letter designed to create a paper trail for termination while appearing to offer support. And if I refuse, I asked, "Well?" Marcus's smile flickered. "I hope you won't, because the alternative would be to move forward with disciplinary action based on the Hartford contract issue alone, and that would be unfortunate for everyone involved." Through his windows, I could see Tom from facilities loading something into his pickup truck, probably heading out to check on the HVAC system at the warehouse he'd mentioned yesterday that the cooling unit had been acting up again. Tom, who'd been here 12 years, who knew every pipe and wire in every building we owned, who'd helped me track down a billing discrepancy 2 years ago by remembering which vendor had replaced the security system in our Riverside location. Tom, who always ate lunch at his desk while reading maintenance manuals. "I need to see the original emails," I said. "I'm sorry, the Hartford amendments. I need to see the originals in the email system, not printed copies, with full headers and metadata." Marcus's fingers drummed once against his desk. "Sarah, I don't think that's necessary. If you're going to put me on a PIP based on emails I supposedly sent, I need to see proof that I actually sent them. That's reasonable, isn't it?" The silence stretched while Marcus considered this. His tie had shifted slightly, no longer perfectly centered, and I noticed a small coffee stain on his shirt cuff that he'd missed. "Of course," he said finally. "I'll have it pull the logs, but in the meantime, I need you to sign the PIP agreement so we can move forward with the process." He slid the papers across the desk. Standard corporate language about improvement opportunities and measurable objectives, but buried in the middle was a clause that made my breath catch any further contract. Irregularities during the PIP period would result in immediate termination and potential legal action to recover damages. "I need time to review this," I said. "Sarah," Marcus's voice had lost its warmth. "I'm trying to help you here. but my patience isn't unlimited. I stood up, leaving the papers on his desk. I understand. I'll have an answer for you by end of business. Good. His smile returned. I'm glad we could have this conversation. The walk back to my desk felt different than the walk to his office. The same hallways, the same fluorescent lights, humming overhead, the same worn carpet with its pattern of interlocking triangles. But something had shifted. The air conditioning that usually kept me comfortable now felt sharp against my skin, and the familiar sounds of the office phones ringing, keyboards, clicking the coffee machine, grinding beans, sounded like they were coming from somewhere else. My cubicle sat in the middle of the operations floor, surrounded by 5 other workstations arranged in a cluster that management called a collaboration pod. The idea was that proximity would encourage teamwork and knowledge sharing. In practice, it meant everyone could hear everyone else's phone calls and see everyone else's computer screens if they looked up at the wrong moment. I settled into my chair and stared at my laptop screen, the Hartford contract folder still open from the meeting. 3 months ago, when I'd first reviewed the agreement, everything had been straightforward. Standard service terms, payment schedules that aligned with our billing cycles, renewal clauses that favored both parties. I'd recommended approval with no changes. Now, according to Marcus's printed emails, I'd supposedly authorized 3 amendments that restructured the payment terms in Hartford's favor and added service requirements that hadn't existed in the original contract. The problem was, I remembered this contract. I remembered everything about it because I'd been proud of how cleanly it had come together. No complications, no back-and-forth negotiations, no vendor management headaches. Just a solid agreement that served both companies' interests. I opened my email and searched for Hartford contract amendment. Nothing. I searched for Hartford and amendment separately. Still nothing. I pulled up my sent folder and scrolled back 3 months, looking for any communication about contract changes. The emails Marcus had shown me simply didn't exist in my sent folder. Sarah, I looked up to find Beth from accounting standing beside my desk, holding a steaming ceramic mug that smelled like peppermint tea. Beth, who kept track of every expense report and reimbursement request with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker who could spot a duplicate charge from 3 departments away, who'd been quietly keeping this place running for 8 years, while a parade of executives took credit for her work. I heard about the meeting, she said, her voice low enough that the neighboring cubicles couldn't pick it up. Are you okay? I glanced around the collaboration pod. Jim from procurement was on a call, his voice loud enough to carry over the partition walls. Lisa from vendor management had her earbuds in, probably listening to one of her true crime podcasts. The other 2 desks were empty, their occupants either in meetings or taking advantage of the flexible work arrangement that Marcus had been steadily restricting since his arrival. I'm fine, I said, just working through some contract documentation. Beth set her mug down on my desk and pulled up the empty chair from the workstation next to mine. The Hartford thing, I looked at her more closely. Beth's job put her in touch with every department, every vendor payment, every expense that flowed through the company's books. If anyone would know about unauthorized contract amendments, it would be her. What have you heard? I asked. Nothing official, but I noticed some payment adjustments in the system last month. Hartford's charges went down by about 12%, which seemed odd because their service fees usually increase at renewal time, not decrease. The air conditioning cycled back on with a soft whoosh, sending a cold draft across my shoulders. When exactly did you notice the adjustments? I asked. Beth pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a personal calendar app. June 7th. I remember because it was the same day we had that all-hands meeting about operational efficiency, and I was trying to finish the monthly reconciliation before the meeting started. June 7th, 2 days before Marcus had supposedly received my emails authorizing the contract amendments. "Beth," I said carefully, "do you keep records of when payment terms get modified in the system?" "Of course. Every change gets logged with timestamps and authorization codes." "Why?" The question hung between us while I considered how much to tell her. Beth had always been straightforward with me, never played office politics, never got involved in departmental drama. But asking her to dig into payment records based on a conversation I'd had with the COO could put her in an impossible position. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your personal email. Important." I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the message. Nobody at work had my personal number except HR, and they would have called, not texted. "Sarah," Beth was looking at me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to check something," I said already, pulling up my personal email on my phone. "Can we continue this conversation later?" "Of course." "But Sarah," she leaned closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "If something's going on with contract modifications, you need to be careful. There are procedures for reporting financial irregularities, and they don't go through department heads." She gathered her mug and stood up, but paused before heading back to her desk. "Also, Tom from Facilities was looking for you earlier. Something about the security badge logs from last week." After Beth left, I opened my personal email. One new message sent from an address I didn't recognize: T Facilities, 2847, protonmail.com. The subject line read, "Badge Access Logs, your request." I hadn't made any requests for badge access logs. The email contained a single attachment, a PDF file labeled Security Access Report, week of June 5-11. I glanced around the collaboration pod again. Jim was still on his call, something about delivery schedules and warehouse capacity. Lisa had her head down, typing rapidly, while her earbuds leaked the faint sound of someone talking about forensic evidence. The other workstations remained empty. I downloaded the PDF. The document was a standard security report, the kind that Tom generated every week to track employee access patterns and identify any unusual activity. Most weeks, nothing unusual happened. People badged in at the start of their shifts, badged out for lunch, badged back in, badged out at the end of the day. Occasionally, someone would forget their badge and need to be escorted by security, or someone would work late and set off the after-hours alarm system. But this report was different. According to the logs, my badge had been used to access the building at 11:47 p.m. on June 8th, the same night before Marcus supposedly received my emails authorizing the Hartford contract amendments. The problem was, I'd been home that night. I'd ordered Thai food and fallen asleep on my couch, watching a documentary about financial fraud in the tech industry. I definitely hadn't been in the office at midnight. I scrolled through the rest of the report, looking for other anomalies. Most of the entries looked normal: people arriving and leaving during business hours, the cleaning crew badging in after 6 p.m., Tom checking on the building systems at various odd hours. Then I found it. Marcus Kellaway's badge had been used to access the building at 11:52 p.m. on June 8th, 5 minutes after mine, according to the logs. I stared at the screen, reading the entry over and over. Marcus had told everyone he preferred to work from home in the evenings, that he found the office too distracting after hours. He'd even instituted a policy encouraging remote work to improve work-life balance and reduce overhead costs. So, what had he been doing in the office at midnight? My phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. "Meet me in the parking garage, level B2, northwest corner. 20 minutes, come alone." The parking garage. Tom's usual spot for conversations he didn't want overheard by management. I'd seen him there before, with other employees, usually right before someone filed a complaint with HR or right after someone had been called into an unexpected meeting with their supervisor. I saved the PDF to my phone and closed my laptop. As I gathered my things, I caught Jim glancing over from his phone call, his expression curious, but not concerned. Lisa still had her earbuds in, lost in whatever story was playing. The elevator down to the parking garage felt longer than usual, though that might have been because I was counting my breaths again. 4 in hold for 4 out. By the time the doors opened on level B2, my heartbeat had steadied to something approaching normal. The garage smelled like concrete dust and motor oil, with an undertone of exhaust fumes that never quite cleared even when all the cars were gone. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the support pillars. Most of the spaces on this level were empty. It was the least convenient parking area, reserved mainly for overflow during busy periods or for employees who arrived late enough that the upper levels were full. I walked toward the northwest corner, my footsteps echoing off the low ceiling. Behind one of the support pillars, I could see the outline of Tom's pickup truck, a 15-year-old Ford with more rust than paint, and a toolbox that took up half the bed. Tom was leaning against the truck's tailgate, wearing his usual uniform of work boots, cargo pants, and a polo shirt with the company logo. But instead of his normal relaxed posture, he looked tense, glancing toward the elevator and the stairwell like he was expecting company. "You got my message," he said as I approached. "That was you." I kept my voice low, though we were the only people on this level. "How did you get my personal number?" "Employee emergency contact list. I have access for building evacuations and security situations." Tom pulled out his phone and showed me the same PDF I'd received. "This counts as a security situation." He opened the tailgate of his truck and gestured for me to sit down beside him. The metal was cold through my slacks, and I could feel the texture of the truck bed liner against my palms. "Tom, what's going on?" "Someone's been using employee badges after hours to access the building. Started about 6 weeks ago, right around the time Kellaway took over as COO. Tom swiped through several pages of the PDF, highlighting entries in yellow. "Look at this pattern." He was right. Once I knew what to look for, the pattern was obvious. Every week since Marcus had arrived, there had been after-hours badge activity that didn't match normal employee behavior. Badges being used at odd times, multiple accesses in short periods, people supposedly entering the building who had no reason to be there. "This is mine," I said, pointing to the June 8th entry. "But I wasn't here that night." "I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you." Tom scrolled to a different section of the report. "Your badge was cloned 6 weeks ago, along with about 12 others." The words hit me like cold water. "Cloned? Someone made a copy of your security badge. Probably happened during lunch when people leave their badges sitting on their desks, or maybe someone borrowed it briefly and you didn't notice." Tom's expression was grim. "The thing is, badge cloning requires specialized equipment and knowledge of our security system architecture. This isn't some random employee playing pranks." I thought about my desk in the collaboration pod, how I often left my badge in the small tray next to my keyboard when I went to meetings or grabbed lunch. How easy it would be for someone to borrow it for a few minutes without me noticing. Who has access to that kind of equipment? That's the question, isn't it? Tom closed the PDF and put his phone back in his pocket. "But I can tell you who's been using the cloned badges. Same person every time. Someone who knows enough about our systems to avoid the security cameras and disable the motion sensors on certain floors." The parking garage felt colder than it should have, and I realized I was shivering. Have you reported this to security? Our security company is contracted through Kellaway's old firm, the same company that handles IT support for the building management system. Tom's voice was flat. I filed a report 2 weeks ago about irregular badge activity. It was marked resolved, without any investigation. So what do we do? Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring across the garage toward the elevator bank. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I've been documenting everything. Badge logs, security camera footage, maintenance records that show when systems were accessed and by whom. I've got 6 weeks' worth of evidence that someone has been using this building for unauthorized activities. What kind of activities? That's where it gets interesting. Tom reached into his toolbox and pulled out a manila folder, thick with printed documents. Want to know what happens to a company's email server when someone with administrative access logs in at midnight? He opened the folder and showed me a printout that looked like a system log full of timestamps and technical codes that meant nothing to me. But Tom highlighted several entries in red ink: email creation, backdating, and insertion into user mailboxes, all happening during those after-hours sessions when someone was using cloned badges to access the building. My stomach dropped. The Hartford emails, among others. I've tracked at least 30 instances of email manipulation over the past 6 weeks. Some deletions, some modifications, some entirely new messages inserted into employee accounts with fabricated timestamps. The implications hit me all at once. Not just the Hartford contract, but potentially dozens of other situations where employees had been blamed for decisions they'd never made, agreements they'd never authorized, mistakes that had never actually happened. Tom, this is... I struggled to find words. This is fraud. This is criminal. Yes, it is. Tom closed the folder and set it on the tailgate between us. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Before I could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed across the garage. Someone was walking down the stairwell, their shoes clicking against the concrete steps in a steady rhythm. Tom quickly closed his toolbox and gestured for me to stand up. We should continue this conversation somewhere else, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of someone talking on a phone. A voice I recognized. Marcus Kellaway. Told you the timeline is non-negotiable. I need the compliance audit completed by Friday, and I need the documentation to support our efficiency recommendations. Tom and I moved quickly but quietly toward the stairwell on the opposite side of the garage. As we reached the door, I could hear Marcus more clearly. I don't care what the previous report said. We're implementing a new operational structure, and that means some personnel changes are inevitable. The PIP process is just a formality at this point. The stairwell door closed behind us, with a soft click muffling Marcus's voice. Tom and I climbed quickly to the first floor, where we paused to catch our breath. Sarah, Tom said, his voice low and urgent. I need you to know that you're not the only one. There are at least 6 other employees who've been put on performance improvement plans in the past month, all based on documentation that was created after hours using cloned badges. 6 others, Jennifer from legal because of some contract language that supposedly wasn't reviewed properly, Mike from procurement for vendor payments that were allegedly authorized without proper documentation, Karen from HR for policy violations that were backdated to look like they'd been happening for months. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus wasn't just targeting individual employees, he was systematically removing anyone who might have the knowledge or authority to question his operational changes. There's something else, Tom continued. The compliance audit he just mentioned, it's being conducted by the same consulting firm that recommended his hiring in the first place. The same firm that provided our new IT security protocols and email management system. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was worse than I'd imagined. Not just isolated fraud, but a coordinated effort to restructure the company by eliminating employees who posed a threat to whatever new operational model Marcus was implementing. Tom, we need help. This is bigger than either of us can handle alone. I know. That's why I reached out to you. Tom checked his watch. There's someone else who's been tracking irregularities from a different angle. Someone who has access to financial records and payment histories. Beth? Beth. Tom nodded. The three of us need to sit down and compare notes, but not here and not during business hours. Where? My place. Tonight after 7 p.m. I'll text you the address. Tom started toward the stairwell door, then paused. Sarah, one more thing. Don't sign that PIP agreement. Once you sign it, they have legal justification for termination based on any future performance issues, no matter how fabricated. But if I don't sign it, then they have to justify disciplinary action based on the evidence they've already presented. And if that evidence was created fraudulently, Tom let the sentence hang. They're in violation of federal laws regarding document fraud and employee rights violations. Exactly. Tom's expression was grim, but determined. The question is whether we can prove it before they finish cleaning house. After Tom left, I sat in my car in the parking garage for several minutes, trying to process everything I'd learned. The familiar sound of the building's ventilation system hummed through the concrete walls, and I could smell the faint scent of cleaning products that drifted down from the upper floors. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a reliable operations analyst with a clean record and a clear conscience. I'd believed that hard work and attention to detail would protect me, that following procedures and maintaining meticulous records would insulate me from office politics and management changes. Now I was sitting in a parking garage holding evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of company leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Need your signature on the PIP agreement by 5 p.m. today. Please drop it by my office when you're ready. I stared at the message, counting my breaths. 4 in hold for 4 out. Then I typed back, I'll need until end of business tomorrow to review the agreement with my legal counsel. The response came immediately. Sarah, I don't think legal review is necessary for a standard PIP agreement. These are routine performance management documents. I wrote back, I prefer to be thorough with any document that could affect my employment status. This time, the response took longer. Of course, I appreciate your diligence. Let's plan to meet first thing Thursday morning to finalize everything. Thursday morning. Less than 48 hours to build a case that could expose 6 weeks of systematic fraud and potentially save the jobs of 7 employees. I started my car and headed back up to the office, my mind already working through the next steps. I needed to get through the rest of the workday without arousing suspicion, needed to maintain my normal routine while internally preparing for a confrontation that could either clear my name or end my career. The elevator ride back to the 3rd floor felt different now. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before: the security camera mounted in the corner, the badge reader next to the button panel, the way the fluorescent lights hummed with a slight electrical buzz. When I got back to my desk, the collaboration pod was busier than when I'd left. Jim was still on his call, but now he was taking notes rapidly, his voice more urgent than before. Lisa had removed her earbuds and was typing furiously, occasionally glancing at her phone. The other 2 workstations were now occupied: Maria, from vendor relations, and Steve, from compliance, both looking stressed. Sarah, Lisa called out as I settled into my chair. Where have you been? Marcus was looking for you about 20 minutes ago. Meeting in the parking garage, I said, which was technically true. What did he want? Something about the PIP paperwork. He seemed impatient. I logged back into my laptop and opened my email. 3 new messages from Marcus, each one marked high priority. The subject lines were variations on the same theme: PIP agreement, action required, performance improvement documentation, and Thursday meeting preparation. I deleted them without reading the contents. Instead, I opened a new document and began typing a detailed account of everything that had happened since I'd walked into the conference room that morning. Every conversation, every document, every inconsistency. If Tom was right about the scope of what we were dealing with, I needed to create my own paper trail before anyone could manipulate the digital records. As I typed, I became aware of the office sounds around me. The air conditioning cycling on and off, the distant hum of the elevator, the soft clicking of keyboards, and the occasional ring of desk phones. Normal Tuesday afternoon office noise. But now I found myself listening more carefully, paying attention to conversations that might be happening just outside my normal awareness. How many other employees were having meetings they didn't understand? How many other people were being presented with documentation that didn't match their memories? Sarah. I looked up to find Beth standing beside my desk again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a woman I recognized from the 4th floor, tall professional, with the kind of precise posture that suggested either legal training or military background. "This is Amanda Pierce," Beth said quietly. "She's from the compliance department, and she'd like to speak with you." Amanda stepped forward and extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her expression serious, but not unfriendly. "Ms. Chen, I understand you've had some concerns about contract documentation. Would you have a few minutes to discuss this privately?" I glanced around the collaboration pod. Jim had finished his call and was now openly watching our conversation. Lisa was pretending to work, while obviously listening. Maria and Steve had both stopped typing and were looking in our direction. "Of course," I said. "Where would you like to meet?" "Conference room C. It's empty for the next hour." Conference room C was one of the smaller meeting spaces located on the 4th floor, away from the main traffic areas. As we walked toward the elevator, I found myself wondering how Amanda had learned about my situation and whether her interest was helpful or dangerous. The conference room was windowless, lit by the same harsh fluorescent lights that illuminated the rest of the building. Amanda closed the door behind us and gestured for me to take a seat at the small round table. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to be direct with you because I think we're dealing with a time-sensitive situation." Amanda sat across from me, her hands folded on the table. "I've been conducting an informal investigation into irregularities in our document management and approval processes. Your name came up in connection with the Hartford contract modifications." "What kind of irregularities?" "Emails that don't match user activity logs. Contract amendments that were supposedly authorized during periods when the authorizing employees weren't in the building. Payment modifications that were processed outside normal business hours." Amanda opened a tablet and showed me a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. Names, dates, times, and brief descriptions of irregular activity. I recognized some of the names employees who'd been put on performance improvement plans or who'd been disciplined for policy violations in recent weeks. "This is bigger than just the Hartford contract," I said. "Much bigger. And it's escalating rapidly." Amanda scrolled through the spreadsheet, highlighting entries in red. "In the past 2 weeks, the frequency of irregular activity has increased by approximately 300%. Someone is accelerating their timeline." "Their timeline for what?" "I'm not entirely sure yet, but based on the patterns I'm seeing, it appears that someone is systematically creating justification for removing specific employees from their positions. Employees who have access to financial records, contract documentation, or operational oversight. Amanda turned the tablet toward me so I could see the full spreadsheet. Ms. Chen, you're not just a victim of this scheme. Based on your position and access level, you're also a threat to whoever is behind it. The implication was clear. As an operations analyst, I had access to contract files, vendor relationships, and approval processes. If someone was manipulating those systems, I was one of the people most likely to notice the irregularities. What do you need from me? I asked. Documentation. Everything you can remember about the Hartford contract review, any conversations you had about contract modifications, any requests for changes that came through unusual channels. Amanda closed the tablet and leaned forward. But most importantly, I need you to not sign the PIP agreement. Why? Because once you sign it, any evidence you provide about document manipulation can be dismissed as retaliation from a disgruntled employee. The PIP agreement contains language that essentially gags you from reporting irregularities related to your work performance. That explained Marcus's urgency about getting my signature. Not just to create a paper trail for termination, but to legally prevent me from whistleblowing if I discovered evidence of fraud. Amanda, there's something else you should know. I told her about my conversation with Tom, the badge cloning the after-hours building access, and the evidence of email manipulation. Amanda listened, without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on her tablet. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. This changes things significantly, she said finally. What you're describing isn't just document fraud, it's systemic infiltration of company systems with intent to manipulate employee records. That's a federal crime. What do? We document everything. And we do it quickly before whoever is behind this realizes how much we know. Amanda stood up and checked her watch. Ms. Chen, I need you to continue your normal work routine for the rest of today. Don't give any indication that you're aware of what's happening. Can you do that? I think so. Good. I'm going to coordinate with Mr. Thompson from Facilities and Ms. Rodriguez from Accounting. The three of you have access to different pieces of the puzzle, and together you might be able to build a complete picture of what's been happening. Amanda paused at the door. One more thing. If anyone asks about our conversation, tell them I was following up on a routine compliance audit related to contract approval processes. Nothing more specific than that. After Amanda left, I sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what we'd uncovered. What had started as a single instance of questionable documentation had revealed a conspiracy that potentially affected multiple departments and dozens of employees. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I could hear the distant sound of the air conditioning system cycling through its regular patterns. Normal office sounds, but they felt different now, like the building itself was part of the deception. I walked back to my desk, passing colleagues who smiled and nodded as if everything was normal. Jim was back on another phone call. Lisa had her earbuds in again. Maria and Steve were focused on their screens, typing steadily. How many of them knew what was happening? How many were victims? And how many were complicit? My laptop was still open to the document I'd been typing my account of the day's events. I saved the file to a personal cloud storage account, then created another copy on a USB drive that I slipped into my purse. For the rest of the afternoon, I tried to maintain my normal routine. I responded to emails, updated project timelines, and reviewed vendor contracts. But my attention kept drifting to the details I'd never noticed before. The timing of email responses, the approval chains for contract modifications, the patterns of after-hours communication. At 4:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Tom, 742 Maple Street, Apartment 3B. 7 p.m. Park on the street, not in the building lot. At 4:45, another text, From Amanda. Bringing additional documentation to tonight's meeting. This is bigger than we thought. At 5:00 p.m. exactly, Marcus appeared at my cubicle. Sarah, I noticed you haven't dropped off the PIP agreement yet. I looked up from my laptop, keeping my expression neutral. I told you I needed until tomorrow to review it with legal counsel. Right, of course. Marcus's smile looked strained. I just wanted to make sure there weren't any questions I could answer for you. Sometimes these documents can seem more complicated than they actually are. I appreciate that, but I prefer to be thorough. Absolutely. Thoroughness is important. Marcus glanced around the collaboration pod, noting who was still at their desks. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, about the Hartford contract and the importance of clear communication. Oh, I realize that I may have come across as confrontational, and that wasn't my intention. I value your contributions to this team, and I want to make sure we're working together effectively. The words were conciliatory, but his tone remained carefully controlled, like an actor reciting lines he'd rehearsed. I appreciate that, I said. Good. I'm glad we understand each other. Marcus straightened his tie, the same nervous gesture I'd noticed in his office that morning. I'll look forward to our meeting tomorrow. After he left, I finished documenting the conversation and added it to my growing file of evidence. Every interaction, every inconsistency, every detail that might be relevant if this situation escalated to formal investigation. At 5:30, I packed up my laptop and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Marcus standing in the hallway outside his office, talking on his phone. His expression was different than the professional mask he wore during normal business hours, sharper, more focused, like someone conducting a military operation rather than managing corporate personnel. The drive to Tom's apartment took me through a part of town I rarely visited, a quiet residential area with older buildings and mature trees that created a canopy over the narrow streets. I found parking easily enough, though I followed Tom's instructions and avoided the building's parking lot in favor of a space along the curb. 742. Maple Street was a 3-story brick building with external staircases and small balconies facing the street, the kind of place where rent was affordable and neighbors minded their own business. Tom's apartment was on the 3rd floor, accessible by a metal staircase that creaked softly under my weight. Tom answered the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me through the window. Come in, he said, gesturing me inside. Beth and Amanda are already here. The apartment was small, but comfortable, with furniture that looked like it had been collected over many years rather than purchased as a set. The living room contained a worn leather couch, a coffee table covered with papers and file folders, and a dining table that had been converted into a makeshift workspace with multiple laptops and documents spread across its surface. Beth was sitting on the couch with her own laptop open, typing rapidly while referring to printed spreadsheets. Amanda stood at the dining table, arranging documents into organized piles. Sarah, Amanda said as I entered, thank you for coming. We've been comparing our data, and the scope of this situation is extensive. Tom closed the door behind me and engaged both the deadbolt and the chain lock. Coffee, beer. This is going to take a while. I accepted a cup of coffee and settled into a chair at the dining table. The documents Amanda had arranged were more comprehensive than anything I'd seen earlier, printouts of email headers, system access logs, financial records, and what appeared to be organizational charts with names highlighted in different colors. Walk me through what you found, I said. Amanda picked up a thick folder and opened it to a timeline chart. Over the past 6 weeks, we've identified 47 instances of after-hours system access using cloned employee badges. During these sessions, the following activities occurred: She pointed to a list that made my stomach drop. Email creation and backdating for 17 employees. Contract modification for 9 vendor agreements. Financial record alterations affecting 12 departmental budgets. Personnel file modifications for 23 employees. Security protocol changes that disabled certain monitoring systems. This isn't just about getting rid of a few problem employees, Beth said, looking up from her laptop. This is a complete restructuring of the company's operational foundation. To what end? I asked. That's what we're trying to figure out. Amanda pulled out another document, what looked like an organizational chart with extensive notes in the margins. But based on the employees who've been targeted and the systems that have been compromised, we believe someone is preparing for a major operational change, possibly a merger acquisition or significant downsizing. Tom sat down across from me, his expression grim. The thing is, this level of system manipulation requires inside knowledge and administrative access. We're not talking about an external hack or a rogue employee working alone. You think Marcus is working with someone else. I think Marcus is working for someone else, Amanda said. The consulting firm that recommended his hiring, they've been acquiring mid-size companies across the industry. Their standard playbook involves installing new management restructuring operations to eliminate inefficiencies and preparing companies for sale or merger. The implications were staggering. Not just fraud, but potentially the systematic dismantling of the company I'd worked for over 6 years. What's our next step? I asked. Beth closed her laptop and turned to face the group. I've been tracking the financial side of this, and there's something else you need to know. The payment modifications that have been made to vendor contracts, they're not random cost-cutting measures. She pulled out a spreadsheet covered with highlighted numbers. Every contract that's been modified now includes payment terms that funnel money through a specific financial services company, the same company that provides consulting services to the firm that recommended Marcus. They're stealing money, I said. They're redirecting it. Technically legal if the contract modifications were legitimately authorized, but since the authorizations were fraudulent, Beth let the sentence hang. It's embezzlement, Amanda finished, on a massive scale. Tom leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. So, we have document fraud, identity theft, unauthorized system access, and embezzlement. The question is, how do we prove it without getting fired or arrested ourselves? We need irrefutable evidence, Amanda said. Something that can't be dismissed or explained away. And we need to present it in a context where Marcus and his associates can't control the narrative. What kind of context? I asked. Amanda smiled for the first time since I'd met her. How do you feel about the quarterly board meeting? The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, less than 24 hours away. It was the one forum where Marcus couldn't control the agenda or limit attendance, where board members had direct access to operational reports and financial data, where questions had to be answered in real time without the opportunity for advanced preparation. The board reviews all major operational changes, Amanda continued. Contract modifications, personnel actions, budget adjustments. If we can present our evidence during that review in front of witnesses who have fiduciary responsibility to the company, they'll have to investigate, Beth finished. They won't have a choice. But how do we get access to the board meeting? Tom asked. They're usually closed sessions. Department heads are required to attend when their operational areas are being reviewed, Amanda said. Marcus will be there to present his efficiency initiatives, and as compliance officer, I have standing access to address any regulatory concerns. What about Beth and Tom and me? You're all subject matter experts who can be called to provide operational context for the board's questions. Amanda's smile widened. Assuming the compliance officer determines that their expertise is necessary for a complete operational review. The plan was risky, but it had the advantage of using the company's own procedures against the people who'd been manipulating them. If we could present our evidence in a formal setting with proper witnesses, Marcus and his associates would be forced to respond without the opportunity to fabricate additional documentation or eliminate potential witnesses. There's one problem, I said. Marcus is expecting me to sign the PIP agreement first thing Thursday morning. If I don't, he'll know something is wrong. Then we sign it, Amanda said, but not the version he gave you. She pulled out a document that looked identical to the PIP agreement Marcus had presented, but with subtle differences in the language. The clause about reporting restrictions had been removed, and several other provisions had been modified to protect employee rights rather than limit them. How did you... I have access to the template library for all HR documents. This is the original PIP template before it was modified with the additional restrictions. Amanda handed me the document. You sign this version, and if anyone questions the differences later, you can claim you were given the wrong document by mistake. Will that work? Probably not for long, but it'll give us enough time to get through the board meeting. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing our evidence and planning our presentation. Amanda would lead with the compliance issues, establishing that irregularities had been detected and required board attention. Beth would present the financial data, showing the pattern of contract modifications and payment redirections. Tom would demonstrate the security breaches and unauthorized system access. I would provide specific examples of document manipulation and employee impact. By the time we finished, it was almost 10 p.m. The coffee had gone cold, and the dining table was covered with organized stacks of evidence, each labeled and indexed for easy reference during the presentation. One last thing, Amanda said, as we prepared to leave. Between now and tomorrow afternoon, we need to be careful. Don't discuss this with anyone else. Don't access any files or systems that might alert Marcus to what we're planning. And don't do anything that might be construed as insubordination or policy violation. What about the USB drives with copies of all this evidence? Tom asked. Everyone takes one. If something happens to the originals, we need backups. Amanda handed out identical USB drives to each of us. Hide them somewhere safe somewhere that isn't connected to your work or normal routine. As I drove home, my mind was racing despite my exhaustion. Tomorrow would either vindicate 6 weeks of systematic abuse or destroy my career permanently. There was no middle ground, no safe compromise that would allow me to escape with my job intact while avoiding confrontation. The streets were mostly empty, illuminated by the orange glow of sodium streetlights that cast long shadows between parked cars. Normal suburban night sounds, air conditioners, humming televisions, flickering through windows, the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. I thought about the first time I'd been hired, how proud I'd been to join a company with a reputation for ethical business practices and employee development. How naive that seemed now, in light of what we'd uncovered. But I also thought about the 6 other employees who'd been targeted by Marcus's scheme, people whose only crime was being competent enough to pose a threat to whoever was really pulling the strings. If we succeeded tomorrow, they'd get their jobs back and their reputations restored. If we failed, I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment in the darkness, listening to the engine cool and tick in the night air. The USB drive felt heavy in my purse, like it contained more than just data files. Tomorrow, everything would change. I woke up Wednesday morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all, though my phone showed I'd been in bed for 7 hours. The plan was to maintain normal routine until the board meeting, which meant showing up for my usual 8:30 arrival time and going through the motions of regular work activities. The morning commute felt different. I found myself checking my rearview mirror more often, paying attention to cars that might be following me, noting details I'd never bothered with before. Paranoid thinking, probably, but the events of the past week had recalibrated my sense of what was normal. The office building looked the same as always, glass and steel, reaching toward a cloudy sky. The parking lot slowly filling with cars as employees arrived for another day of routine corporate activity. But now, I saw it differently. The security cameras mounted at each entrance, the badge readers that tracked every person's movements, the systems that had been compromised to enable 6 weeks of systematic fraud. I badged into the building at 8:27 a.m., just 3 minutes earlier than my usual arrival time. Normal variation, nothing that would attract attention from anyone monitoring access patterns. The elevator ride to the third floor felt longer than usual. Soft instrumental music played through hidden speakers, mixing with the hum of ventilation fans and the almost silent whisper of the elevator motor. I counted my breaths, 4 in hold for 4 out, and tried to project the calm composure of someone who had nothing to hide. The collaboration pod was busy when I arrived. Jim was already deep in conversation with someone from procurement about delivery schedules. Lisa was typing rapidly while talking on her headset, probably coordinating with overseas vendors. Maria and Steve occupied their usual workstations, both looking focused but not stressed. I settled into my chair and opened my laptop, bringing up the same routine tasks I'd been working on for weeks. Email responses, project updates, vendor communications, nothing that would seem unusual to anyone monitoring my computer activity. At 9:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Available for our meeting now, if you're ready. Have the PIP paperwork." I responded, "Yes, I'll be right there." I gathered the modified PIP agreement Amanda had prepared, along with a folder of routine work documents to make the meeting look normal to anyone who might be watching. The walk to Marcus's office felt like walking through water, every step deliberate, every gesture controlled. Marcus was waiting behind his desk when I arrived, wearing the same professional smile he'd shown during our first meeting 2 days ago. His office looked exactly the same: stark white furniture, expensive abstract art windows, overlooking the parking lot where everything had started to unravel. "Sarah, thank you for taking the time to review the agreement thoroughly. I appreciate your diligence." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Any questions before we finalize everything?" "Just one clarification about the reporting structure during the improvement period," I said, opening the folder and removing the document. "I want to make sure I understand the expectations clearly." "Of course." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression attentive. "What specifically would you like clarified?" "The section about operational oversight and documentation review. I want to ensure that my work product meets the standards you're implementing." It was carefully neutral language that could mean anything, designed to let Marcus fill in the details without revealing that I knew about the document modifications. He scanned the agreement quickly, his eyes moving across the page in a pattern that suggested he was looking for specific language rather than reading comprehensively. "This looks fine," he said after a moment. "Standard language about performance expectations and measurable objectives." He hadn't noticed the differences, or if he had, he was choosing not to mention them immediately. I signed the document with the same pen I'd used for hundreds of routine approvals over the past 6 years. My signature looked normal, steady, unremarkable. Marcus countersigned with a flourish, then made a copy for his files. "Excellent. I'm glad we could get this resolved quickly." Marcus closed the folder and set it aside. "I'll be presenting operational efficiency updates at the board meeting tomorrow afternoon, and I'd like to include some metrics from your department to demonstrate the positive impact of our new performance management protocols. What kind of metrics? Productivity improvements, error reduction, processing time optimization. The kinds of measurable outcomes that show board members we're making effective use of our human resources. The language was corporate speak, but the implication was clear. He wanted to use my department's work as evidence that his efficiency initiatives were succeeding, probably to justify expanding the program to other areas of the company. "I'll prepare a summary report," I said. "That would be perfect. Nothing too detailed, just high-level numbers that demonstrate positive trends." Marcus stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "I'll send you the format guidelines this afternoon." As I walked back to my desk, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. The first phase of our plan had worked. I'd signed the PIP agreement without arousing suspicion, and I'd learned that Marcus was indeed planning to use the board meeting to expand his operational changes. But now came the harder part, maintaining normal routine while preparing for a confrontation that could expose everything. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine activities. I responded to emails, updated project timelines, and prepared the summary report Marcus had requested. But my attention was divided. Part of my mind focused on normal work tasks, while another part rehearsed the presentation we'd planned for the board meeting. At 11:30, Beth appeared at my cubicle with her usual ceramic mug of peppermint tea. "How did the meeting go?" she asked quietly. "Fine, he bought it." I kept my voice low and neutral. "Are you ready for this afternoon?" "As ready as I can be." Beth sat down in the empty chair beside my desk. Amanda sent around the meeting agenda. "Marcus is scheduled to present from 2:30 to 3:15. Board questions and discussion until 4:00. That gives us 45 minutes to present our evidence and let the board ask questions. If everything goes according to plan." Beth's expression was worried. "Sarah, are you sure about this? Once we start down this path, there's no going back." I thought about the question she was really asking. Was I prepared to sacrifice my career, my reputation, and my financial security on the possibility that we could expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of company leadership? "I'm sure," I said. At 12:00, I took my lunch break and walked to the small park across from the office building. It was a beautiful day, clear sky, moderate temperature, the kind of weather that made you glad to be outside. I sat on a bench under a maple tree and ate a sandwich while watching office workers from nearby buildings take their own lunch breaks. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a small group of their colleagues was preparing to blow up a corporate conspiracy that afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Board meeting moved to conference room A, 2:00 p.m. start time. Marcus presenting first." The earlier start time meant less opportunity for anything to go wrong, but it also meant less time to prepare. I finished my sandwich quickly and walked back to the office building, badging in through the main entrance, with the same routine gesture I'd made thousands of times before. The afternoon felt different. Conversations seemed quieter. People moved with more purpose, and there was an undercurrent of tension that might have been my imagination, but felt real enough. Word had probably gotten around that the quarterly board meeting was happening, which always made employees nervous about potential changes or announcements. At 1:45, I gathered my laptop and the folder of evidence we'd prepared, along with the routine work documents that would make my attendance at the board meeting look normal. As I walked toward the elevator, I caught a glimpse of Tom emerging from the stairwell carrying his own folder and wearing the slightly more formal shirt he reserved for meetings with senior management. Conference Room A was the largest meeting space in the building, located on the 4th floor with windows overlooking the main street. It was equipped with a full presentation system, video conferencing capabilities, and seating for up to 20 people around a polished oak table. When I arrived, 6 board members were already seated around the table, along with Amanda and 2 other employees I didn't recognize. Marcus stood at the front of the room, adjusting the projector settings and reviewing notes on his laptop. He looked up as I entered, his expression professionally neutral. "Sarah, thank you for joining us. I know the board will appreciate hearing your perspective on our operational efficiency initiatives." I took a seat near the middle of the table, close enough to see the presentation screen clearly, but far enough from Marcus to avoid feeling like I was under direct scrutiny. Beth arrived a few minutes later, followed by Tom, who nodded politely to the board members before taking a seat near the back of the room. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the board chair called the meeting to order. "Good afternoon, everyone. We're here for our quarterly operational review, with a focus on the efficiency initiatives that have been implemented over the past 6 weeks. She looked toward Marcus. "Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours." Marcus smiled and clicked to his first slide. The presentation began with standard corporate language about operational excellence, resource optimization, and measurable performance improvements. Charts showing productivity metrics, cost reduction targets, and timeline achievements. Everything looked impressive on the surface. Productivity was up, costs were down, and employee performance metrics showed consistent improvement across multiple departments. But I knew how those numbers had been generated. "As you can see," Marcus was saying, "our new performance management protocols have resulted in significant operational improvements. Employee accountability has increased, contract management has become more streamlined, and we've eliminated several inefficiencies that were impacting our bottom line." He clicked to the next slide, Personnel Actions and Performance Improvement. The slide showed a list of employees who'd been placed on performance improvement plans, along with the reasons for their PIP status and the expected outcomes of the improvement process. My name was at the top of the list, with contract documentation irregularities listed as the primary concern. "In some cases," Marcus continued, "we've identified employees whose work quality had declined to the point where formal intervention was necessary. The performance improvement process has been effective in addressing these issues before they could impact operational efficiency." One of the board members raised her hand. "Mr. Kellaway, can you provide more specific information about the nature of these performance issues? The documentation here is fairly general." "Certainly." Marcus clicked to another slide, showing examples of the performance issues that had triggered PIP actions. Contract amendments supposedly authorized without proper review. Vendor payments processed outside normal approval channels. Budget modifications that hadn't been properly documented. All examples of the fraudulent documentation we'd uncovered. "For instance," Marcus said, "we discovered that several contract amendments had been authorized by employees who may not have fully understood the financial implications of their decisions. This resulted in cost overruns and vendor payment discrepancies that required significant time and effort to resolve." He was describing the Hartford contract situation, but presenting it as if my alleged mistakes had cost the company money rather than saved it. Another board member leaned forward. "These seem like significant operational problems. How do we ensure they don't happen again?" "That's an excellent question." Marcus's smile widened. "We've implemented enhanced oversight protocols and modified our approval processes to include additional review steps. We've also updated our employee performance standards to ensure that all team members understand their accountability for operational excellence." In other words, he was using the fraudulent documentation to justify expanding his control over company operations. I glanced around the table. The board members looked appropriately concerned about the performance issues Marcus had described. They had no reason to doubt his presentation, no context for understanding that the evidence he was showing them had been fabricated. Amanda was sitting near the far end of the table, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes focused on Marcus with laser intensity. When he finished his presentation and asked for questions, she raised her hand. "Mr. Kellaway, I have some concerns about the documentation you've presented." The room went quiet. Marcus's smile flickered slightly, but his voice remained steady. "What kind of concerns?" "As compliance officer, I've been conducting a routine audit of our document management and approval processes. I've identified some irregularities that I believe the board should be aware of." Marcus glanced toward the board chair, his expression shifting from confidence to carefully controlled concern. "What kind of irregularities?" "Unauthorized system access, document modification outside normal business hours, and evidence of security protocol breaches." Amanda's voice was calm, professional, devastating. "I believe these issues may have impacted the reliability of some operational documentation." The board chair leaned forward. "Ms. Pierce, are you suggesting that the performance issues Mr. Kellaway has described may not be accurate?" "I'm suggesting that the documentation used to support those conclusions may have been compromised." Marcus stepped forward, his professional composure intact, but tension visible in his shoulders. "I'm not sure what Ms. Pierce is referring to, but I can assure the board that all of our performance management documentation has been thoroughly reviewed and verified." "By whom?" Amanda asked. "By the appropriate department heads and HR personnel." "And when did those reviews take place?" Marcus paused, clearly calculating how much he could say without contradicting himself. "Over the past several weeks, as part of our ongoing performance management process." Amanda opened her laptop and connected it to the projector system. "I'd like to show the board some additional information that may be relevant to their evaluation of these performance issues." The first slide that appeared showed a timeline of system access logs with entries highlighted in red, indicating unauthorized after-hours activity. The second slide showed specific examples of document creation and modification occurring outside normal business hours. The third slide showed badge access records indicating that employees had supposedly been in the building at times when they were actually documented as being elsewhere. "What you're seeing," Amanda said, "is evidence that someone has been using cloned employee security badges to access company systems after hours for the purpose of creating and modifying employee performance documentation." The room was completely silent now. Board members were leaning forward, studying the information on the screen with expressions of growing concern. Marcus remained standing at the front of the room, but his confident posture had shifted to something more defensive. Furthermore, Amanda continued, clicking to the next slide. "We've identified evidence that contract modifications and vendor payment changes have been made through the same unauthorized access, resulting in the redirection of company funds to external accounts." She showed financial records that Beth had compiled, demonstrating the pattern of payment modifications and the ultimate destination of the redirected funds. "Ms. Pierce," the board chair said, her voice sharp with concern, "are you alleging that company funds have been embezzled?" "I'm presenting evidence that suggests systematic manipulation of company financial and personnel records for the purpose of restructuring operations in a way that benefits external entities, rather than the company itself." Marcus finally spoke, his voice tight, with controlled anger. "These are serious allegations, and I think it's inappropriate to present unsubstantiated claims in this forum without proper investigation." "Mr. Kellaway," the board chair interrupted, "do you have an explanation for the system access irregularities that Ms. Pierce has documented?" "I'm not familiar with the specific technical details, but I'm sure there are reasonable explanations for any apparent discrepancies." "Such as?" Marcus hesitated clearly. realizing that any explanation he offered could be verified or disproven by the technical evidence Amanda had presented. I think we should postpone this discussion until IT can provide a complete analysis of the system logs, he said finally. Actually, Tom said, speaking for the first time since the meeting had started, I can provide that analysis now. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, connecting his own laptop to the projector. I'm the facilities manager for this building, which gives me access to all security and IT systems. I've been tracking the unauthorized access patterns for the past 6 weeks. The slides Tom showed were even more damning than Amanda's. Detailed logs of badge cloning activities, security camera footage showing unauthorized building access, and system records demonstrating exactly which files had been accessed and modified during the after-hours sessions. The pattern is clear, Tom said. Someone with administrative access to our IT systems has been using cloned employee badges to enter the building after hours and manipulate employee records, contract documentation, and financial data. One of the board members pointed to a specific entry on the screen. This shows unauthorized access occurring at the same time Mr. Kellaway's badge was used to enter the building. Can you explain that? All eyes turned to Marcus. His face had gone pale, and the confident smile he'd worn throughout his presentation had completely disappeared. I sometimes work late in the office. That's not unusual for senior management. According to these logs, Tom said, your badge was used to access the building at 11:52 p.m. on June 8th, the same night that several employee email accounts were accessed and modified. Were you working on employee performance issues at midnight? I don't recall the specific date, but as I said, I sometimes work unusual hours. Mr. Kellaway, the board chair's voice cut through his explanation. These are very serious allegations. Do you have any explanation for why your badge access coincides with unauthorized system modifications? Marcus looked around the room, his gaze moving from board member to board member, then to Amanda Tom Beth, and finally to me. When our eyes met, I saw something I'd never seen before in his expression. Fear. I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of my work activities, he said carefully, but I'm confident that a thorough investigation will clarify any apparent irregularities. I'm sure it will, the board chair said. Ms. Chen, you were mentioned specifically in Mr. Kellaway's presentation. Do you have any comment on these allegations? This was the moment we'd planned for. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, my hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I'd like to show the board the original Hartford contract documentation, I said, connecting my laptop to the projector, so they can compare it to the modified versions that were used to justify my performance improvement plan. The side-by-side comparison was devastating. The original contract I'd reviewed and recommended for approval was clearly different from the version Marcus had presented as evidence of my mistakes. The modifications had been made after my initial review using fabricated emails with my signature to create the appearance that I had authorized changes I'd never seen. As you can see, I said, the contract modifications that allegedly cost the company $47,000 were made after my review was completed using emails that don't exist in my sent folder and were supposedly sent during a time when I was not in the building. I clicked to the next slide, showing my own badge access records for the relevant dates. I can provide additional evidence that I was not in the building at the times when these emails were supposedly sent. This is, one of the board members began, then stopped and looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Kellaway, do you have an explanation for these discrepancies? Marcus was no longer trying to maintain his professional composure. His tie was askew, his shirt was damp with perspiration, and his hands were shaking slightly. "I think there may be some technical issues with the document management system," he said. "Sometimes emails can appear to be sent at different times than they actually were, depending on server synchronization and—" Mr. Kellaway, another board member, interrupted. "Are you familiar with the consulting firm that recommended your hiring for this position?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Marcus visibly flinched. Yes, of course. Meridian Strategic Consulting conducted the executive search process. And are you aware that Meridian Strategic has been acquiring companies in our industry through a process that involves installing new management restructuring operations and preparing companies for sale? Marcus stared at the board member, clearly unprepared for this line of questioning. "I'm not familiar with their acquisition activities, because according to our research," the board member continued, "Meridian Strategic has acquired 14 companies in the past 2 years using essentially the same playbook that appears to be unfolding here. New COO hired to implement efficiency initiatives, systematic removal of key operational personnel, and redirection of company funds to external accounts controlled by Meridian affiliates." The room was completely silent. Marcus looked like he was calculating whether to continue denying everything or to cut his losses and admit to whatever he thought he could get away with. "I think there may be some misunderstanding about my relationship with Meridian," he said finally. "I was hired through their executive search process, but I'm not involved in any acquisition activities." "Then you won't mind if we conduct a forensic audit of all the documentation and financial records that have been modified since your arrival," the board chair said. It wasn't really a question. Marcus nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he understood that his position was no longer tenable. In the meantime, the board chair continued. "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending the results of that audit. Security will escort you from the building, and your access to all company systems will be suspended immediately." Marcus started to speak, then stopped. He gathered his laptop and notes his movements, mechanical and defeated. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at the room. "I want you to know that everything I did was intended to improve operational efficiency," he said. "Sometimes necessary changes are difficult to implement without resistance from entrenched interests." Then he was gone, escorted out by building security, while the board members sat in stunned silence. The aftermath was swift and thorough. Within hours of the board meeting, the company had engaged a forensic accounting firm to conduct a complete audit of all financial and operational records. The FBI was notified of potential federal crimes related to document fraud and embezzlement, and Meridian Strategic Consulting found itself under investigation for corporate fraud across multiple states. I spent the next 3 days in meetings with auditors, investigators, and attorneys providing detailed accounts of everything I'd observed and documented. The evidence we'd compiled proved to be comprehensive enough to support criminal charges, and the investigation quickly expanded to include other companies where Meridian had implemented similar efficiency initiatives. By the end of the week, all 7 employees who'd been placed on performance improvement plans had been reinstated with full back pay and cleared records. The contracts that had been fraudulently modified were restored to their original terms, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in redirected payments. Marcus Kellaway was arrested on federal charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. During his interrogation, he provided evidence about Meridian Strategic's operations that led to additional arrests and the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen funds from companies across the country. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the same conference room where everything had unraveled, meeting with the board chair and the interim COO they'd hired to clean up the mess Marcus had left behind, Ms. Chen. The board chair said, "I want to personally thank you for your courage in bringing this situation to our attention. Without your willingness to speak up, we might never have discovered the scope of what was happening." "I had help," I said. Tom, Beth, and Amanda all played crucial roles in documenting the evidence and presenting it effectively. Which is why we're promoting Ms. Pierce to Chief Compliance Officer and offering Mr. Thompson a position as Director of Security Operations, the interim COO said. "We've learned that effective oversight requires people who are willing to ask difficult questions and challenge authority when necessary." "What about Beth?" "Ms. Rodriguez has been offered the position of Chief Financial Officer," the board chair said with a smile. "We need someone we can trust to rebuild our financial oversight systems." "And what about me?" "We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Operations Analysis with expanded authority over contract review and vendor management," the interim COO said. "The board believes that your attention to detail and commitment to accurate documentation make you ideally suited for a role with greater oversight responsibility." I considered the offer, a promotion, increased responsibility, and the opportunity to help rebuild the systems that had been compromised. But I also thought about the cost of the past few weeks, the stress, the fear, the uncertainty about whether doing the right thing would destroy my career. "I accept," I said, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want written assurance that employees who report irregularities or challenge management decisions will be protected from retaliation. And I want that policy implemented immediately before we announce any of these personnel changes." The board chair and interim COO exchanged glances, then both nodded. "Done," the board chair said. "We've learned that a company is only as strong as its willingness to listen to employees who notice when something's wrong." 3 months later, I was working late in my new office, a real office, with windows and a door that closed when Tom knocked and poked his head inside. "Still here?" he asked. "It's almost 8 p.m. "Just finishing up the quarterly compliance review," I said, gesturing to the stack of files on my desk. "Want to make sure all the contract modifications are properly documented." Tom laughed. "Some habits die hard. Good habits," I corrected. "The ones that keep us honest." He settled into the chair across from my desk, the same way he'd done in the parking garage that afternoon when everything started to unravel. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought about the question. The past 3 months had been challenging, rebuilding systems, implementing new oversight procedures, and dealing with the media attention that came with exposing a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud scheme. But every day I went to work, knowing that the company I'd helped save was now operating with integrity and transparency. "No regrets," I said, "but I've learned something important." "What's that?" "Following the rules perfectly doesn't protect you if the people making the rules are corrupt. Sometimes you have to be willing to break the system in order to fix it." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "And sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention when something doesn't feel right." Through my office window, I could see the parking lot where this whole story had begun, where I'd first noticed that something was wrong with the Hartford contract documentation. The sodium streetlights cast the same orange glow, and the building's ventilation system hummed with the same familiar rhythm. But everything was different now. The systems were cleaner, the oversight was stronger, and the people working here knew they could speak up when they noticed irregularities without fear of retaliation. I gathered my files and locked them in the secure cabinet beside my desk. Tomorrow would bring new contracts to review, new processes to monitor, and new opportunities to ensure that the company operated with the integrity its employees and customers deserved. As I walked to the elevator, I thought about Marcus Kellaway, now serving a federal prison sentence for his role in the Meridian strategic conspiracy. I wondered if he understood that his downfall hadn't come from sophisticated law enforcement techniques or corporate espionage. It had come from employees who paid attention, who counted their breaths when something felt wrong, and who were willing to risk everything to expose the truth. The elevator doors closed, and I counted my breaths one more time. 4 in hold for 4, 4 out. Perfect rhythm for starting over.